Good morning. Thanks. I'm Sherry Pollack. I am the moderator this morning. Welcome. I'm not sure if we have any first-timers here, but in order to sort of help build our shared understanding of what humanism is and what we as humanists believe, we typically start with a brief quote or definition of humanism. So I'm going to read to you humanism in less than 100 words. So humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance that affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. Humanism stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethics based on human and other natural values in a spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. Humanism is not theistic, and it does not accept supernatural views of reality. So this is the minimum statement on humanism, created in 1996 by Humanists International. It's a short summary of the Amsterdam Declaration, which is the defining statement of humanism agreed by member organizations in 1952, and then revised in 2002 and again in 2022. And now, moving on to our program. So, as part of our ongoing series of our summer programs that focus on our members and their interests and skills, I am pleased to introduce this morning Charlie Saxe, who is an avid cyclist, a year-round commuter from Cahokia to the Loop, and a regular on the Grand Illinois Bike Tour. He's an active member of the cycling community as an advocate and cycling instructor with local, statewide, and national organizations. In addition to his cycling, Charlie's an active member of our society, serving on the AV and community days committees, and he's recently joined our board of trustees and leads our writers group. Charlie often writes accounts of his cycling adventures, which he shares with the writing group and with Cahokia Bike Network's Tales from the Trails annual storytelling event. He may eventually publish something, but in the meantime, he's pleased to share his reflections with us today as part of this presentation. So take it away.
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning. My name is Charlie Saxe. This is a presentation of the Grand Illinois Bike Tour, and I'll just give you a little overview of how this is going to be organized. I've been on about 7 of these tours, and then there was an interruption in 2020 due to COVID, and I did a self-guided kind of tour of the Quad Cities areas. So what's included in here are material from all of those tours. They're not necessarily organized chronologically. They're more thematically organized. And in addition to the material that I took, the pictures that I took, which were through a lot of GoPro videos that I captured some stills. I actually took some photographs with an actual camera. There's some of them in there too. And then there are photographs and material from other people who were on the ride. Every year there's a collection. They do a collection of pictures of rides that people take. And so I have borrowed some of those for the purposes of this tour. Just a little background, and the other thing I'm going to do is share some written reflections that I did. So I'll go through the presentation, and every once in a while I'll stop and read something that I'd written about it. And one of the things I want to start with is how I got involved with the tour, why I ride the tour. And it started about 15 years ago when my wife and I had a conversation where I suggested that since I'd lived in Chicago for, at that point, over 20 years, it'd be nice to actually visit Illinois. For me, like many of us who live in the Chicago area, there were rarely any reasons to visit other parts of the state other than to schlep college kids to their school or perhaps visit a selection of curated destinations such as Starved Rock, Galena, Shawnee National Forest, or Springfield. It is only then when we venture beyond the hinterlands of the suburban expanse into rural Illinois. And even then, those trips involve barreling along the interstates or highways to reach our destination as expeditiously as possible. While I'm also an avid cyclist, most of my cycling is on my commute to the Loop during the week, along with occasional recreation rides. I'd always entertained the idea of bike touring, but for a variety of personal and family circumstances, I never followed up on it. To remedy this situation, about 11 years ago, I decided to go ahead and purchase a touring bike in anticipation of riding on some tours. However, I had not picked any tours nor arranged to carve out any time to do so. So in 2018, I combined my two desires to do bike touring and visit Illinois and registered for the Grand Illinois Bike Tour. There are a lot of reasons why people do biking. Some use the opportunity to reconnect with friends and enjoy unencumbered time and experiences with each other. For some, it is their family vacation with spouses and kids. There are others that ride various tours throughout the year, which is their time for exploration of new places. For me, the tour is catharsis, an opportunity not only to visit new places, but to venture into a completely different headspace, escaping from the grind of work and daily routines. It is a time to indulge in the exertion of the long rides while getting much needed air and sun. It is a time for personal restoration and renewal. As I've done these tours over the past 8 years, I have not only enjoyed the getaway time and the opportunity to see new places, but I've also connected with new friends, learned new things about myself and others that have made these rides far more enriching and invigorating than anticipated. They have added a dimension to my perspective and enabled me to become much more than I was or would have otherwise been. As I share some of these experiences with you this morning, I hope that it stimulates insights for you and encourages you to consider a bike tour. Or if not a bike tour, at least suggest ways that you can make the simplest of visits and travels more enjoyable and enriching. So now let's hop on our bikes and go along for the Grand Illinois Bike Tour. The Grand Illinois Bike Tour is organized by an organization called Ride Illinois. It's a major fundraiser for them. Ride Illinois is a nonprofit organization that focuses on bicycle advocacy, education, and awareness around the state. The pictures here are some of the people that make the bike tour happen. In the center of the picture there is Dave Simmons. He's the executive director. On the right is Ed Barsati, founding director of the Ride Illinois and still involved with organizing the tours. Below center is Ben Harris, who's actually here today. He was the bike coordinator for this year. And then there's a whole slew of volunteers that make it happen. So there's a lot of people that carry the luggage, drive the material around, provide support and the SAG support as well for the ride. There's a short video. This is an older video, but a short video that gives a summary of the tour. And let me play this. It's a couple of minutes, and it'll give you a good overview of what the tour is and what it's like to be on the tour. We getting the audio?
So the Grand Illinois Bike Tour is a tour of Illinois. We're showing people the best sights of Illinois, the small towns, the quiet rural roads, some of the trails, and we've been doing this for 15 years.
This tour is very well organized, and I like that there's the option that you can camp or you can also stay in a hotel. And I like that it's 300 miles in 6 days, so it's totally doable. So, and I feel like it's been very well thought out, the tour plan, so we've avoided roads that have a lot of trucks or traffic.
Well, I think it's well run. There's people you meet from all over, not only Illinois but other states. And,
favorite part is meeting other bikers. I've never met somebody that rides their bike regularly that isn't a nice person and somehow interesting.
You get to meet a lot of new people. I think we probably have about half of the people coming back, and then the rest of them are newbies.
Everyone's very friendly, you get to know people, and that's also part of the experience.
That's the great part, is people who come back year after year after year. I think it says a lot for the tour if you have people that come back like that.
My favorite things about the ride are that I don't have to deal with traffic. It's been really nice. Just when you need it, there's a SAG stop for, for more water or Gatorade. It's working out real nice.
There's a lot of variety, and it's safe and kind of worry-free biking for that day.
This is a tour about exploring Illinois by bike, which is a great speed to explore a new place by.
So that's the Grand Illinois Bike Tour. Some basic facts about it. It's a 6-day fully supported tour. It's in the second week of June of each year. Different routes and destinations every year. There are 5 overnight stays at hotels arranged by the tour. The video made a reference to camping. And there used to be a camping option. In fact, when it originally started, it was all camping, but the camping has been a casualty of COVID. There are 4 travel day routes with distances between 45 to 80 miles. So every day there's about that range of riding, and you can choose which route you want to do depending on how much riding you want to get in. There are 2 occasions when we stay over in a location and we have layover days. And during those layover days, we do some further exploration in the area that we're in with various different ride options. And then this year we had some optional activities such as canoeing during the trip. Fully supported means refreshments and water stops. There's a t-shirt included. This is this year's t-shirt. Local bike shops provide experts repairs and support for if you need any bike maintenance while on the tour. There's luggage transportation, so you don't have to carry your stuff with you on the bike. You bring your suitcase, you load it up on the truck, they take it to the next destination, and you just ride your bike. There are hotel breakfasts that can be seen as a perk or not, depending on the quality of the hotel breakfast. And to be honest, some of these places, the breakfast can be hardly considered food, but they are available. And there are evening gatherings, which include group activities such as Velociphy. Velociphy is a book group or a discussion group that meets daily. We have a selection of readings or movies or stories or things that we read, look at and view prior to the ride, and then when we get together on the ride we have discussions about them. Usually they're organized around a theme that is related to the locations where we're riding. And then there are various receptions and group singing, and of course lots of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Just kidding. It's more about camaraderie and fellowship. There are no drugs that I'm aware of other than medications, plenty of medications. And I've not witnessed anything that would qualify as rock and roll on these tours. So riding along the Grand Illinois Bike Tour is just a normal activity. Good, I'm glad. As I mentioned, I've ridden, the tour, the video mentioned they'd done this for 15 years. That tour was done in 2017, so at that point they'd done 15 years, and of course we've done 7 more since then. I've been on the 7 rides since then, and this is a Strava heat map. I use Strava to track my rides, and as you can see up in the Chicago area, very dense with all the riding that I do in this area, but I also kept track of the tours on Strava, and you can see this is a good illustration of the location of the tours throughout the state. And you can see we cover a lot of different parts of the state. Central Illinois gets a fair concentration. There were 3 tours in that general area, all very distinct tours, but still in that general area. And then there are other parts of the state. There are areas of the state that are conspicuously absent, and the reason for that is it's a pretty big group. It's about 200 people, and not every place has the facilities and capability to accommodate a group that size. So we're limited to going to places that can accommodate a big group of people as they roll in, and we do kind of roll in and kind of take over some of the hotels in the area. There are lots of bikes on the tour. People ride all kinds of bikes. You can see there's this a human-powered vehicle. It's basically a recumbent bike with a fiberglass shell for the aerodynamics. It's a pretty cool thing to watch. It really can go very fast. The aerodynamics make a big difference, and you can ride that bike very fast. There's tandem bikes. This is a 3-person tandem bike, and this is a family on their family vacation. Recumbent bikes, my bike, which is in front of us here. There are road bikes, and then there are e-bikes as well. This is an example of e-bikes. I haven't seen one of these big wheeled bikes on the tour, but that was a cool picture, so I thought I'd include it in there. And of course, there are a lot of cool people, and this is one of the real treats of the tour is the people, and people have different reasons. So there are groups of friends that will live in different areas, and then they'll come together for the bike tour, spend a week together and reconnect. And there's quite a few of those on the tour, and it's kind of a lot of fun. And these 3 women do this every year, and their exuberance is contagious. They just have a blast, and they're just, and they just smile and laugh, and they're present throughout the tour. There's families, there's friends that gather, and then there are bike clubs. There are various bike clubs and groups that do the tour. And in addition to people who are on the tour, there are people we meet along the tour, people who are in the hotels or in the communities where we're riding, and it really is kind of a special treat. And I wrote a reflection on one of these events where we ran into somebody along the tour. And among the things I enjoy about biking in a place I've never been nor know anything about are the mere coincidences when I meet complete strangers, and the only thing we have in common are the heat, air, dirt, and sweat. Stripped down to our basic humanity, we humbly share our experience with levity and humor. One such experience was in rural Logan County, where a group of us were riding towards Springfield when a summer storm began rolling across the farm country. Most of us in the group were from the Chicago area and had no experience with a violent thunderstorm in the open and flat landscape. In a truly pathetic attempt, to hide from the ominous, dangerous storm, we clustered next to a house along the road. Shortly thereafter, the woman who lived in the house peeked through the drawn blinds of her windows into her yard and found a bunch of aging, lycra-clad aliens from the mysterious Chicago nebula. Clearly out of our element and clueless about what to do with the approaching storm, she stepped out of her door onto the porch and barked at us, "What are you doing out here? Get inside." It was a spontaneous, generous offer of shelter from the furious winds and pelting rains to the strangers who had landed in a lawn. We gathered huddled in her modest living room as the storm rolled over the house. The drone of the TV precluded any conversation, which I think relieved all of us because I sensed we really would not know what to say. The winds thrashed the trees in the house, knocking over a few of the bikes outside, but otherwise sparing us any further damage. After the winds died down and the rain passed, we thanked her and shuffled out of the house, got on our bikes and rode off, grateful for the offer of shelter and to be back on our bikes. We have the activity, as I mentioned, Velocity. During the Velocity, we've had presentations from the Illinois State Department of Natural Resources talking about Lincoln's time in New Salem, and that was part of a Lincoln theme that we had for that tour. Another theme we had for the tour was in the Metro East area around St. Louis. We read about Lewis and Clark, and we had a presentation from a curator from the Lewis and Clark Museum talk about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And then in the evenings, people gather. We have a woman who has a bicycle-powered blender, and she blended smoothies for the group with her bicycle-powered blender. We have the sing-alongs, as we mentioned, and then the canoe rides this year during the layover day. And of course, one of the big features are the ice cream trucks that occasionally come by the hotel. And those are very popular. And this is this family that was on the tandem. And as you can see, Mom and Dad do most of the work, but the kid gets most of the ice cream, which makes you want to be 11 again. And then, of course, there's some gatherings of meals. We used to have catered meals for the entire group every night, but that's tapered off. But we do have 1 or 2 meals where the entire group eats together, and it's fun. I was going to do a little thing about geography, and it really is. We know about Illinois; it's flat. But one of the things that's interesting about Illinois is that it's organized around the rivers. Most of the communities are organized along the major rivers. And of course, on the bike tour, we get to explore these rivers. The Mississippi River, of course, which is a magnificent river and has a lot of interesting history and features to it. The Illinois River, the Rock River, and the Sangamon River were all rivers that we ride along in various communities. It's really quite spectacular. Of course, Illinois has a lot of history to it. It's a very interesting place. It has a rich history going back pre-Columbian times. And then, of course, there's the state history itself, including things like the Hennepin Canal Trail, which we ride across. We were down in Springfield on a couple of occasions, and there's the opportunity to visit the old State House. And this is where they have a sign there marking when... This is a marker where Barack Obama had declared his candidacy for president. There are lots of war memorials in the various towns, the Civil War memorials. That's a big part of the Illinois history. Illinois is home to 4 presidents: Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan. We had the opportunity to ride through his birthplace in Tampico. We went through Eureka, and we also visited his boyhood home in Dixon. So very interesting. I'm not a big Reagan fan, but the being in these places and getting a sense of what the place was, where he came from, was very interesting. There's the Underground Railroad. This is actually on the Missouri side. We cheat occasionally and go to other states like Iowa and Missouri. Just keep that on the down low. But we rode down the trail into St. Louis, and along the trail is the Mary Meacham Freedom Crossing, where escaped slaves would seek help to cross the Mississippi to get into the free state of Illinois. And then, of course, there's the European settlement, and there are various communities that have, the features of the original European settlers. And this is Fulton, Illinois, where had a large Dutch settlement, and when the Dutch settled in these places, they did what Dutch do, which is dig canals and build windmills. This is actually a working windmill in Fulton. One of the interesting things about being in central Illinois or downstate is you realize that Illinois historically, from the European settlement, developed from the south north. So the original settlement was in and around, came up the Mississippi River, came up the rivers. That's where the Europeans came through in Illinois originally. And so a lot of these towns, their cultural, economic, and social maturation was earlier than Chicago. And so you see the remnants of this. You see these houses, you see these buildings, you see these structures that were from this period. And some of them are absolutely spectacular. This is in Bloomington, in a historic residential district in Bloomington, Illinois. There's the other tributes to various histories. This is part of the industrial history of Illinois. This is a statue tribute to the Radium Girls in Ottawa. And then, of course, you have many of the towns you go through are county seats, and they have the typical structures. You have this very handsome, in some cases spectacular, county courthouse. This is in Pontiac. It's a beautiful building. And then you have, surrounding that, this commercial square. And so each one of these towns, and being in each of these towns, generates its own experience. And this is a reflection I wrote on this recent trip where we were in Ottawa, which is the county seat for LaSalle County. The Pan-Asian restaurant in downtown Ottawa was innocuous, a selection from a set of random choices for us 4 visitors passing through on the bike tour. It was a Monday night when many restaurants and businesses were closed, and the activity of the streets was subdued. We walked into the nondescript storefront and initially did not see any seating area, which was off to the side. We were looking for a sit-down dinner, but for this establishment, dine-in eating seemed more of an afterthought. The woman at the front counter was busy fielding takeout and delivery orders while her daughter sat quietly nearby, immersed in something on her iPad. There was no waitstaff or host, and the woman behind the counter paused between online and phone orders and invited us to pick one of the handful of tables and come back to place our orders at the counter. The woman was pleasant enough, but could hardly be described as service. We selected a table where each of us studied our menus and when ready, walked to the counter to place our orders. We returned to the table and started our conversation, which meandered from recounts of the day's events on the tour, where we rode, and the shared notes on the roads, the wind, Starved Rock, and the I&M Canal Trail. The conversation then meandered along the sinuous path of life, careers, family, and travels, with periodic pauses between stories. There was no music in the restaurant. It was quiet. The pauses in the conversation were relaxed and not pregnant with the sometimes awkward silence during a group conversation. It seemed natural and unforced. The uncluttered pauses allowed us to stop and reflect on what we'd been saying. Without the sonic competition of ambient music, our conversation was relaxed and fluid. There was no strain to be heard or clearly understood. Words flowed naturally, an undistracted conversation. After dinner, we walked along the calm streets of a quiet summer Monday evening in downtown Ottawa. We made a point of visiting some of the notable sites in the area. We walked over to the Radium Girls statue in tribute to the women who worked in the clock and instrument factories, painting glow-in-the-dark numbers on the faces of the devices. We paused, read the historic marker, and noted the moments. We moved on to the Central Square where Lincoln and Douglas debated in 1858. We read the Looking for Lincoln marker, walked past various war memorials, still quiet. Periodic small waves of cars and occasional rumble of a motorcycle passed by. The noise from the traffic ebbed and flowed, but there was no synthetic sound between the gaps to create a sonic drone. It was delightfully pleasant. How often do we override our own thoughts and blunt nuanced reflections of others when we create a wall of sound whose only purpose seems to be to insulate us from ourselves? It's part of the joy of being on a bike tour, the quiet and unencumbered time with acquaintances, with shared experiences who eventually become friends. the absence of pervasive synthetic noise and distraction being a gift of the moment. Illinois also has a very rich and tragic native history. And one of the things we came across on this ride, this is near the Mississippi River where the Albany Indian Mounds. This goes back to the 800, 600, era of the year of the Common Era. And these are fascinating places. And Illinois being an agricultural state, there are a lot of archaeological sites that were literally plowed over that just don't exist anymore. But these effigy mounds they're kind of subtle. They're not, a lot of them are not really big, but they kind of roll along and they almost appear to be part of the natural landscape. And that prompted another piece that I wrote that I call Effigy Mound, coming across one of these effigy mounds and visiting one of these mounds. Misty, damp, a walk through the woods, slightly worn path, lightly maintained grass, a serpent on the hill, low mound, sinuous, gently rises above grade, calmly slopes down, clearly recognizable in its form, unmistakably human-made, nonetheless natural, earning an easement in the landscape over the passing centuries. The presence of its creators, the artisans of its time, seep into conscious awareness, accompanying the day's visitors, enriching the experience of discovery and wonder. The calm of the solace remain on the hill, while the presence of the moment stays with the visitors as they return to the day to be embedded in recollections and live among the living. Of course, one of the big Indian mounds in Illinois, of course, is Cahokia. And this is a picture of Monk's Mound in Cahokia, and it's a spectacular site. But when I went there and I took this picture of the mound, and I began to wonder myself, who were the people that thought putting a 4-lane highway in the middle of a heritage, a World Heritage site was a good idea? And then, of course, your thinking sort of goes, I tend to get into some devious thinking, and I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, okay, you got this highway, where's the mailbox? And then I was thinking, I'm looking at this, and I said, these Mississippians, I'm looking at the bikes that are on the ground there, and the guys riding the bikes up there, and I'm thinking, the Mississippians built this huge structure, and there's no place to park your bikes. What were they thinking? So, and it gets worse from there. So I climbed up to the top, and I started looking at the views, and it's really quite spectacular. And this gives you a sense. In front of the mound, there was a big, huge plaza where people would gather, and of course, you can see how the highway really enhances the site. And then I get into my thinking again, well, wait, there's an opportunity here. What a great place for a brew pub. Can you imagine just sitting out there having a drink and something to eat and looking over this spectacular site? And then, if you got tired of Cahokia, you could go and look at downtown St. Louis. Anyway, my mind goes to strange places sometimes. Then there's the Legend of Starved Rock. It's a fascinating area. It's a fascinating story. And if you read more into it, you realize that was a really critical area in Illinois, not only for the Native Americans, but for the European settlers as they came in, and eventually the Americans. And there's a lot of history to the site. The Starved Rock story is actually a legend. It's not actually true. But there was a lot of activity in that area, and there was conflict, quite a bit of conflict among the Native Americans and among the Europeans, and among the Europeans and the Native Americans. And then, of course, the tragedy of the Black Hawk Wars. This is a site near the, it's not the actual site, but it's near the Indian Creek Massacre, which was one of the battles of the Black Hawk Wars. Of course, you're going to do history in Illinois, you're going to do Lincoln. And there's lots of Lincoln stuff everywhere. You go to Springfield, you can go to the museum, you can go to the Oak Ridge National Cemetery. You see Lincoln statues in front of the various courthouses throughout the state, because he was a part of he traveled on the, he was a circuit court attorney, and so he traveled throughout the state, and there are these various places, and they have this area called the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area, where they have these looking for Lincoln markers. You can find these things all over the place, and they're absolutely fascinating. And I wrote an account of when I found, just before I even knew what it was. It's hot, steamy hot. A warm June day in central Illinois where the sun beats down from the clear sky and the heat radiates from the dark pavement. The air offers no relief as the humidity inhibits the cooling evaporation of sweat from my skin while I roll along on my bicycle. 3 days in on this tour, as the miles accumulate, so does the heat. I stop to take a break, drink some water, and take in the surrounding rural landscape. It's quiet and calm. I see a sign in the middle of the roadside park that looks of interest, an historic marker of sorts. I walk over to the sign and learn that I had stumbled upon a Looking for Lincoln historic site. It's one of many Looking for Lincoln sites throughout the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area in central Illinois. These sites tell the stories of Lincoln's almost 30 years in Illinois communities where he worked, traveled, and lived. This site was in DeWitt, where, as the story is told, in the spring of 1854, 9 local women, joined by others from Springfield, plotted against the village saloon frequented by their menfolk. The ladies banded together and crusaded against the demon whiskey. They subsequently stormed into the saloon, rolled the whiskey barrels out into the street, destroyed the kegs, and poured the vile liquid into the ground. Shortly thereafter, they found themselves in the DeWitt County Courthouse, charged with riotously, unlawfully, and with force, turning out, wasting, and destroying 10 gallons of whiskey of the value of $5. They had not yet hired a defense attorney, but it just so happened Abraham Lincoln was in the courtroom and offered his services. Lincoln argued the ladies were not criminals, but righteous and moral women attempting to save the men from the evils of alcohol. He declared they'd been prompted by the same spirit and conviction as those who cast tea into the harbor during the Boston Tea Party. At this point, I can just imagine an exasperated judge who, given the nature of the 19th century circuit court, traveled with Lincoln and likely knew him well, recognizing the absurdity of equating vandalizing a saloon with the Boston Tea Party, interrupting Lincoln's oratory and saying something to the effect of, Abe, I get it. The guys had it coming, but trash in a saloon is still against the law. Lincoln lost the case. The judge imposed a fine of $2 on each of the accused. The money, however, according to local law, was never collected, and thus, through our able and earnest Abe, justice was served. After a lift from the laugh, I got back on my bike with a smirk, happily pocketing a souvenir of the unexpected joy of a good story. Illinois is a big agricultural state, and you come across this. You see it all the time. You're immersed in it. This is a picture of from John Deere's homestead in Grand Detour, Illinois. And John Deere revolutionized agriculture throughout the U.S. and in North America, and actually globally, when he invented the steel-plated plow. And Illinois soil is very rich, but it was very dense prairie, and preparing the soil for agriculture was an enormous amount of work. And the steel plow enabled the farmers and the settlers to do it much more efficiently. Of course, John Deere equipment is a little different today. And we come across it, but it's still there, and you still have this agricultural, industrial scale agricultural equipment. This is in the John Deere Pavilion in Moline, Illinois. This is a combine harvester, so you can see the difference from the original steel-plated plow to now the huge, enormous piece of equipment. And the landscape is this vast landscape that is engineered and organized around agriculture. Of course, and within the towns, there are the various grain elevators that serve and collect the materials. So you see this agricultural economy, and you get a sense of the agricultural economy, and it's industrial scale agriculture. Of course, these days you have some variations on the theme. This is a solar farm that we came across this past year, and of course there are plenty of wind farms. So the land is being adapted to be used for various things. And we ride through these places, and you get a sense of the economy. And the economy in various different parts of the state, it's uneven. In some places, there are parts of the state that are doing well, and then other places, the economy is really not kept up with the changes of the past several decades. And I wrote this reflecting on that too. While riding on the tour, we passed through many small towns. Some of them are still county seats with a town square and a handsome county courthouse from the 19th or early 20th century. Others are mere relics and remnants of places receding in time. There are notable places like Pontiac and Casey that have fared well, retaining a sense of charm and vitality. Others are shells of worn buildings and squares that offer glimpses of a lost time, like a weathered shoreline eroded by the riptides of progress. The worst cases are merely a confluence of unused streets where a grain elevator, rail line, and post office are the faded bones of a carcass that has long since decomposed. For the worn towns, typically, we would ride through in quiet passing. With no stake or little interest, we clinically note the present state of dilapidation, while focusing on riding on what smooth pavement remains while avoiding pockets of loose gravel and debris scattered among unattended streets. Occasionally, amidst the economic decline, there are well-maintained homes and buildings hinting of continued life. One day during the tour, in one such town, a local congregation opened their church to offer snacks and refreshments to the sweaty swarm of our group. It was a dying church and a dying community, but they loved both and were happy to share their food and tours of their small church. It was the 150th anniversary of the founding of their church, and they seemed grateful to have us listen to their story. A simple, open, shared moment of connection, free of presumption, posture, or pretense. I went into the fellowship hall and helped myself to their offerings of bananas, oranges, and some water, and was greeted by one of the members of the church. We engaged in small talk as I asked her about her community and the history of their building. She took me on a tour of her church, which seems conspicuously well maintained, as if the building benefited from more tending than use. I asked her about the congregation and where they came from. She explained that historically they were residents of the town and nearby farms. But over time, the older people retired and left, and younger families moved to larger communities to find work. She cited her own children that moved elsewhere, and even those that remained in the vicinity attended a megachurch closer to nearby Effingham. It was a curious exchange. I wasn't sure what to do with her story other than to accept what she had shared. I sensed from her a plea to be relevant, that her time and place still had meaning. As we finished the tour and returned to the fellowship hall, I thanked her and let her know that I appreciated her hospitality. But like so many others from her community, I rode on to a larger town with more modern facilities and amenities. Nonetheless, while the visit was just a few short minutes, it has stayed with me. I genuinely appreciated her openness and hospitality. The visit was also a reminder that for all of us, while the world may move beyond us, there is still meaning and relevance to our lives and the gifts and generosity we share with others. Yes, her time and place is still meaningful and still relevant, even to an itinerant cyclist who has no other connection to her world. Culture. So I put this slide together and I really struggled. Okay, what do I say about culture? And you know, there's so many different things, and I really don't know a lot. You know, I don't really have a lot to say about it because I'm not really an expert. But I did think, and I thought to myself that really culture is a manifestation of how our lives are lived. The value of its artifacts being how they are meaningful and relevant to our shared experience. On the bike tour, our immersion in places we visit enable us to explore these connections and become attuned to the relevance of these artifacts, expanding our perspective and enriching our experience. Cultural artifacts can also be about how lives are imagined, creative expressions that in of themselves become part of our shared experience. There are plenty of examples of life imagined which over the years have become ingrained in our cultural lore and connection. And that's definitely true here with the Americana. You know, we come across silly things like the house that had the M&M characters in their front lawn. It was hysterical. Of course, Jake and Elwood Blues, the story is they're from Rock Island. So if you're in downtown Rock Island, you'll see them sitting in a couple of chairs out on the street. And where else can you see Paul Bunyan eating a gargantuan hot dog other than on Route 66? If you want to have a conversation about the cross in Effingham, I'd be happy to do that. I'm not going to go into it right now. It was a very interesting experience to visit that. And I mentioned Casey. Casey, Illinois is a smaller town, and a group of businesses got together and decided to put together some tourist attractions. And what their theme was is the world's largest furniture. So then these are officially, you know, Guinness Book of World Records, giant furniture. So they had a giant rocking chair. They also built the world's largest mailbox and the world's largest wind chime. They also had the world's largest clothespin. So it's a fascinating It's a fascinating place, and it's delightful. It's wonderful. You just go in there, and we rode in on the bikes, and you get off the bikes, and you wander around. People are wandering around. You get yourself a cup of coffee, or might get something to eat. It's just pleasant to be there. The Grand Illinois Bike Tour started out as the Grand Illinois Trails and Parks Tour. I thought it would be good to sort of go over some of the trails and parks that we go through. And there's some beautiful trails. This is a trail in Rockford along the Rock River. This one also along the Rock River. There's the Kickapoo Trail in Champaign County, the Sangamon Trail in Sangamon County, and then there are various other side paths and trails across covered bridges and the like throughout the state. There are also state parks, and there's some very nice state parks. Starved Rock is somewhat of a cliche, but for very good reason. It's a spectacular park, and it's a good place to visit. This is Pierre Marquette State Park down near the confluence of the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. Larson's Landing in Effingham County, Clinton Lake. If you're okay with hanging out near a nuclear power plant, Clinton Lake is a nice park. This is a park I happened upon, just sort of found. It was along the route. This is near Sterling. It's really very nice, very pleasant along the Rock River. And then Kamlara Park was one of the starting and ending points in McLean County, just north of Bloomington. But it's very interesting what the land has become. And when you get this perspective of the agricultural land, the older historic towns, the native history, and you get immersed in this. And I wrote a reflection on this too. There are two advantages of touring by bike. One, while not a motorized vehicle, riding a bike enables you to cover a lot of ground. Bicycles expand your geography well beyond what can be covered by walking. The second is that unlike motorized vehicles, yet like walking, biking enables you to become immersed in the places you're visiting. Not only do you see the sights, you breathe the air, hear the sounds, smell the smells, and feel the temperature and humidity. Biking offers the opportunity for a full sensory experience of the place you're visiting, as it is lived. Through this immersion, we are aware of the age of the structures, the infrastructure, the geographic features that not only offer a snapshot of how these places are today, but what they have become across the arc of time. It is remarkable to bike through Illinois and realize how much of the landscape has been engineered to serve our modern lifestyles and material needs. The engineering of our landscape and its productive capability are truly amazing achievements. Thousands of square miles of industrial scale agriculture feeding millions. Dams, locks, and dredging of our waterways in an attempt to manage the hydrology of an entire continent. Hundreds of thousands of miles of paved roads whisk motorized vehicles across and through the state. Even natural areas of state parks and national wildlife refuge areas are necessarily managed, as the natural regenerative capacity of the land has been stripped away to serve the expediencies of our modern industrial mechanized way of life. In 1949, Aldo Leopold, in his Sand County Almanac, one of the readings from our philosophy book group, wrote a brief chapter on traveling through Illinois. In it, he writes of riding a bus through Illinois, where he describes the road as a ribbon of concrete, widened and widened, until the field fences threatened to topple into the road cuts. In the narrow thread of sod between the shaved banks and the toppling fences grow the relics of what was Illinois, the prairie. Later he writes, the highway stretches like a taut tape across the corn, oats, and clover fields. The bus ticks off the opulent miles. The passengers talk and talk and talk. About what? About baseball, taxes, sons-in-laws, movies, motors, and funerals, but never about the heaving groundswell of Illinois that washes the windows of the speeding bus. Illinois has no genesis, no history, no shoals or deeps, no tides of life and death. To them, Illinois is only the sea on which they sailed to ports unknown. Leopold's account from 75 years ago is still relevant today. Where will we be 75 years from now? One purpose of our time is to define our children's time. Do we know that path? Riding on these tours allows me to reflect on the arc of time, the land that my children and grandchildren will learn to live and enjoy. Wildlife. Now, I'm a city guy, so you know, when I see the cows and the cattle, and not everybody would consider them wildlife. I consider them wildlife. These guys look menacing. These cows look menacing. I don't know what she's doing standing so close to them. I would never do that. And then, of course, there are the geese. This goose ran right in front of me. It was strange. I don't know. It was by the side of the road, and I'd come by, and it runs right in front of me. And then, of course, there are other geese. This is a multi-use trail. There were dozens of cyclists riding down, and of course there's a goose asleep in the trail. Other people took photographs. Somebody along the tour this year captured a bald eagle. There was a very strange sight of a turtle nesting right next to the bike trail in DeKalb County. That was kind of a funny event. I was riding along the Illinois, the I&M Canal Trail, which is a towpath for the I&M Canal that is now used for a trail, and you can bike down it. It's not, large parts of it are not really improved. It's a gravel trail, it's very wooded, and I came across this raccoon that was not at all pleased to see me riding down the trail. And then I was riding in Rockford, in a neighborhood in Rockford. Now, I'd never seen this before in an urban neighborhood, but a wild turkey just kind of wandered across the street. Like it was going from their house to a neighbor's house or something. I don't know. It was very strange. But there are other ways to experience wildlife in Illinois, and I had visited a friend in Champaign, and then this is another account of how wildlife in Illinois, how we live with our wildlife in Illinois. It had been a while since I'd visited Gene. This occasion was during the 2024 tour as it passed through Champaign, where he lives. We share an indirect family relationship and a mutual connection of perspectives, interests, and a sense of humor. We had more visits when his wife Chris was alive and my son attended the University of Illinois in Champaign. These earlier visits would include gatherings of spouses, all the kids, and a barbecue in the backyard. Warm days when the yard was bathed in sunshine and we would wander down to the edge of the adjacent pond to watch the geese and other birds. With Chris's passing and the kids moving on, the visits became rarer. By this time, it had been several years. When I arrived on my bike, the house looked the same. Things were in order, and it was quiet. We greeted each other with warm smiles and a handshake, opened some beer, and sat outside on the deck as Gene grilled some burgers. The warmth of the day was receding with the sunset. As we shared small talk about family and the various towns I rode through on my bike, the weight of the advance of time became more present. I asked him about the birds. 109 species so far this season, he said, of his annual count of the birds he observed in his backyard. Do they eat the cicadas? I asked. I don't have the cicadas, he said. The conversation turned to the various broods and subspecies and their mysterious absence from his neighborhood during the 17-year cycle of 2024. We sat down to eat, and there was more food than was necessary, the habits of preparing food for a larger gathering. Gene quipped that he'd have plenty of leftovers, which was good for a chuckle, but also drew attention to the quiet absence of his house. Our conversation returned to his birds. He talked of their characteristic behaviors, their songs, and how he observed them. He appreciated the Merlin app on his phone that enabled him to identify the species of birds he was hearing but could not see. If they don't move, you can't see them, but you can hear them, he explained. He also talked of the almost playful rivalry he had with the geese who would eat the grass seed he put down to repair his lawn. He spoke of them as if they were impish children. As the light faded, I needed to get back to the hotel where I was staying. I bid Gene farewell. It was good to see him. Though the presence of the past loomed over us, Gene still had his birds. They made his eyes sparkle and bring new life to his home every spring. A regular cycle that recalls the joys of earlier days and the prospect of something new each season, both timely and timeless. I rode back to the hotel with an acute awareness that another moment in life had passed, moments that are never to be recovered, making them all the more treasured. I may not get to see Gene as often as I'd like, but I'll always keep an eye out for his birds. And so, like all good things, the Grand Illinois Bike Tour comes to an end, and it's kind of ironic that on the 6th day of the tour, I'm just beginning to get my sea legs and I'm feeling strong, and I end up having a strong ride back to the van to close out the ride. And we park the van in a location, park our cars in a location, and that's where we return. And as I return to the van at the close of the ride, I have some closing thoughts. When I close the tour and load my bike onto the van, I take a moment to pause for pensive reflection. This year, I wish I was better prepared both logistically and psychologically, and there was too much wind. Sometimes it's too hot. Sometimes there are too many bugs. But one measure of the quality of my experience is gauged by a simple question, one that is particular to Illinois. While I was out riding my bike, looking for Lincoln, what did I find? Reflecting on these moments and reading Lincoln's speeches and essays, I'm always amazed how he was able to express our shared values, and even with the weight of 4 years of brutal civil war, could still muster the graciousness to speak to our better nature. One thing I've learned on these bike tours while looking for Lincoln is how in these simple moments of Lincoln's early life and career, the sparsely settled prairie of Illinois cultivated and nurtured a giant of history, and how the spirit still lives today. Wheeling around central Illinois, looking for Lincoln markers are everywhere. While the stories range from the mundane to the memorable, there are always a joy, and some are real gems. When I get back to biking around Chicago, there are no looking for Lincoln markers. My daily commutes and errands are characterized by acute alertness and seasoned experience, reading the traffic and keeping a wary eye on the distracted, impaired, or agitated driver in a vehicle that is often too big for them, the road, or its purpose. Of course, keeping a cautious eye out for trouble, inevitably I find it. However, I've also learned to be mindful, to be looking for Lincoln, those moments of shared basic humanity, humility, levity, and generosity. And guess what? When I look, I find them everywhere. Be well, live well, ride on. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us. We are going to pause for our musical interlude before Q&A. So this is our opportunity to show our support for our society and our Sunday morning programs by offering a donation. We have collection baskets that will be coming around, and you can also donate at ethicalhumanistsociety.org/donate. I think I got that right. Or by using the QR code above. Musical interlude. All right, if you have a question for Charlie, you can approach the mic over here and get an answer.
How would you say, well, how long is your daily commute? And how would you say you approach your preparation differently for a long tour versus your daily commute? And how do they feed into each other, perhaps?
That's a good question. The daily commute is about 11 and a half miles each way. So it's about 45 minutes on the bike. And it's twice a day, so it's at discrete times of the day. The difference between the commute and the tour is a long single ride. So generally the daily commute is a good way to get the conditioning in, so the conditioning isn't as much of a problem. But you do need to get used to sitting on the bike for a long time, and that can get pretty sore. So generally what I will do is prior to the tour, I'll get in a couple of longer rides, maybe a 30-mile ride. I'll go up to the Botanic Gardens and come back, make sure I still have the legs and the butt muscles to be able to handle it. But that's how I do it. Because I ride regularly, frequently throughout the year, I'm usually in pretty good shape for it. But there are times that it's different. Like, this year, for example, we had a lot of wind and it was pretty warm, and your body, the dehydration is a thing that you need to be concerned about, and you need to focus on, okay, how am I gonna do the nutrition? How am I gonna do the hydration? And you do really need to plan for that, because when I got done with the first day, I rode about 80 miles the first day into a very strong wind. It was brutal. And when I got to the hotel, I really felt it. And I think what I did is I kind of underestimated how much water I would need in that latter half of the ride, and I wasn't quite as prepared. I usually have 2 water bottles on the bike that I bring with me. The problem is during the day they warm up. So what I try and do is say, okay, where's going to be a space where I can get to a place I can stop and get some fresh water to close out the ride. So those are the things to consider in a long tour. Now, if you don't ride on a regular basis and you're going to do a long tour, you do need to make a special effort to do the preparation and get the conditioning, and also to make sure your bike's in good shape and the bike fits you well. That's another consideration as well.
Thanks for a good talk. Thanks for reminding me that SAG stands for Support and Gear, because I had heard that term and I couldn't remember. I'm just curious, I know you mentioned how many people were on the ride, and I don't remember what the number was, but did you encounter cases where like local people knew you were coming and were prepared to sell you pies and drinks and things like that? Because sometimes that happens.
Yeah, so the ride is very well organized, and there are groups that are sort of giving a heads up that we're coming through. So they're not selling us things so much, but we do have people that places like that church, they have an offering of refreshments and the like. There are also places that will, like they're in Mount Pulaski, there's a historic society that dresses up and acts out various activities in the courthouse, and so they were there, and as we rode through, they were there giving tours of the courthouse and talking about the things that happened in Mount Pulaski. So there is quite a bit of that goes on. One funny incident is that we let a restaurant know that, hey, we're going to have the tour's coming through. We're going to recommend that we stop here. And so we showed up, and there were at that time there were about 200 of us, and it completely overwhelmed the restaurant. And while they were sort of prepared and glad to have us come through, the people who were working there just got completely overwhelmed, and they had like several people in the kitchen, and some of the wait staff just walk out and quit. And it was kind of funny, because it's just like we just completely swamped this place. But yeah, and people, we run into, the hospitality is almost always very generous and friendly and the like. So it's a really good experience, and people are real good about it.
Yeah, I was wondering, this reminds me of my old Iowa days, and there was something every year in Iowa that I never did. I always thought about it. I think they called it RAGBRAI, which stood for some sort of right across Iowa. Some I don't remember all the.
The Register's annual Great Bike Ride across Iowa.
The newspaper, yes. So I'm just wondering, how many states do you know of? Other states do things like this. Is this fairly unique or not?
Well, this is. There are a lot of tours. That's a good question. There are a lot of tours, and a lot of states have their own tours. There are actually several tours that are organized in Illinois. There's the Rail Tour, which is right across Illinois. Indiana has a similar tour they call the Rain Tour. Ohio has one. There are a lot of tours in Michigan and Wisconsin as well. So every state, there are organizations. They're not necessarily formally, like the RAGBRAI is the granddaddy, the sort of the big one that everybody knows about. But there are other places that have tours that just sort of visit around the state, and it's a fairly common and popular thing that states do, and it's a great way to promote tourism in a lot of smaller towns. We go through these towns, and a lot of these towns have not seen 200 people in the same day for centuries, right? and we come through, and they're just thrilled to have us, and so it's pretty common.
I have lots of questions, but I'll stick to one for now. So I imagine everybody's not like riding together in one bunch at the same pace, right? So what's kind of the distance and time spread? And is there like somebody, kind of following at the end, like, all right, we're throwing your bike in the van because you're taking too long?
Yeah, it's definitely not a group ride. So we do not ride as a group. There are groups within that do ride together, but some of us start out, I tend to start out very early in the morning to beat the heat. So I'll get out and I'll start at 6 a.m. and I'll usually finish that day's ride. If it's a long ride, it might be till 1, or it's usually, around noon. So I'm done with the ride before the really intensely hot part of the day. But there are people that wait and they start later and they just ride at a more relaxed pace. I tend to ride the longer routes. Occasionally I'll take a shorter route if I want to give myself a bit of a break. But the ride itself, people leave at whatever time they want to leave, and they ride through the day. So there'll be people who will start out at 6 a.m. and there'll be people who will start later, and then there'll be people arriving at the end of the ride well into the afternoon.
Hi, I do have a bike, but your talk, because of my age, inspires me to buy an e-bike. Now my question to you is, because I often look down on e-bikes when I do ride my bike, that's not like bike riding. How many, you said there were some e-bikes, and how many, do you know? And do others look down on them too?
No, there are quite a few. I don't know the numbers per se, but there's quite a few people that do ride e-bikes. There are people that ride tandem e-bikes. There are a couple of recumbent e-bikes. There are all kinds of variety of bikes, and nobody looks down on the e-bikes. I mean, the great thing about the e-bikes is they do expand your geography and make it possible to do things that you otherwise might not be able to do on a bicycle. So there's no sort of like, oh, you're on an e-bike, you're not really riding kind of thing. That doesn't happen. I think most of us have that target date when we actually get an e-bike. In the back of our mind, it's like, how close am I to actually just pulling the trigger and getting an e-bike? And every year it gets closer and closer. So.
Well, first I want to say thank you. I learned a lot. And to answer your question, over 1/3 of the participants have pedal-assisted bikes. Okay, so you talked earlier about headspace. Okay, and then I just did the calculation of approximately how many hours you're on the bike for 6 days. That's over like 50 plus hours of just cycling. How do you think, like, what topics are you thinking about, or can you just go numb?
I try and think as close to nothing as possible. I really don't ruminate on things. I really just try and absorb the space. My mind will wander. Of course, you can't let it wander too much because you have to pay attention to being on the bike. But no, I'm really open to what I'm experiencing on the ride and what I'm seeing. And sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I've been doing this for a few hours now. It'd be good to get to where I'm going. But there really isn't. It's not like I think about something while I'm riding. Now, in the evenings, I will I do make a point of taking some notes and sort of keeping a journal, a very basic sort of sketchy journal of the stuff that I came across. And there may be things that I come across during the day that are notable, and I read some of those, and I'll write some notes and I'll write up some drafts of some of the experiences. I start with the objective stuff, like what was the event, what was the situation, where I was, that kind of thing. And then I sort of think about it a little while, and then I'll sort of jot down what my impressions were, and then I synthesize it eventually into a hopefully coherent piece of writing. So.
Thank you for an inspiring talk. You mentioned in the beginning that some people who were riding they camped. how easy is it to bike camp in Illinois, and do you have any tips for somebody who might be interested in that?
I don't camp. I didn't camp, but I do know that there are services, for example. So the tour doesn't do camping any longer, but the tour would arrange for places along the tour, usually in some sort of public park. It might be a county park or a state park, even a municipal park, but a place that enabled the camping. And then people were pretty much on their own to sort of arrange. The camp materials, like the tents and everything like that, would be loaded up onto the trucks, and the tour would then move it from site to site. And then people would be on their own to sort of set up their own tents. Now, some people, there are services that you can hire and pay that will go to your location, set up your tent, so when you arrive there, everything's set up and ready. You don't have to do the setup. Usually there'd be at these various park sites, and this is where the logistics comes in, and it got kind of complicated, that they'd have showers and things like that, places where you can shower up and wash up and the like. And they also would have at these places the group meals, so they would have the catered meals come in, so there'd be some place where you could eat and that kind of thing. So it was really like I said, a fully supported tour. If you're doing your own kind of unsupported tour, that's very different, and I don't really have any insight as to how that might be done. Ben has done that kind of stuff, so if you want to talk to Ben, he can fill you in a little bit.
I have a half-serious follow-up to an earlier question. So do people look down on the recumbent bicyclists?
Not at all. Not at all.
But are you
No.
sure? And then could, like, the total cost for preparation, excluding the cost of the bike, what does this usually run the typical or average person?
The tour itself, I think for the hotel, I think is around $1,100. And then the preparation of the bike, it depends on how much work you need done on your bike and how much work you're willing to do yourself. So it really is, the work, the amount you spend on the bike itself is not very much if you have the bike. And like I said, the tour itself is around I think it was $1,100 to $1,200 for the week.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Well, very good. I'll be around for a little bit. If you have any other follow-up questions, I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.